Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we offer thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. Because if you're on this show, you probably are a wholesale change agent. My name's Ian Heller. I'll be your co-host today, along with my business partner. He's the hero of heuristics and the doctor of distribution, Jonathan Bine, PhD. Jonathan, how are you today, my friend?
Pleasure. Every day I work with you, Ian Heller. Thank you, sir.
Likewise. Yeah, we just got back from a business trip together, so it was fun to be on the road again. Indeed. So, hey, we have a great show today. We're very honored to have as our guest, Mr. Erik Gershwind, who's the president and CEO of MSC Industrial Supply. But before we jump into that, we need to do a little business because all of this is possible thanks to our sponsors. So we'd like to thank again the sponsor who's been with us for a long time, Oracle NetSuite. For more than 20 years, NetSuite has helped organizations grow, scale, and adapt to unpredictable change with a unified true cloud platform. They especially enable fast-growing wholesale distribution companies to achieve operational excellence, manage margins and inventory, and support and expand their geographical footprint for years to come. NetSuite provides an integrated system that includes financials, ERP, HR management software, CRM, professional services automation, and omnichannel commerce. Most notably, though, is their demand planning and advanced inventory management capabilities. Used by more than 28,000 customers in 215 countries and dependent territories, NetSuite has worked with HVAC, electronics, electrical, furniture, home goods, and industrial supply and equipment companies, just to name a few. NetSuite is a true cloud solution and the best fit for your wholesale distribution company. So thank you, NetSuite. We really appreciate the ongoing support. Also, welcome back, Kiklo. Kiklo is not a new sponsor, right? I mean, an occasional sponsor. We really appreciate their support. And they like to say that product content is the key to online business. But the reality is that most distributors struggle to get quality, accurate, and complete product content from their suppliers and are limited in resources to tackle such a massive issue on their own. Without great content, you have issues such as undiscoverable products, which is like they don't even exist, customer experience issues, poor user adoption, and bad SEO. Kiklo is helping to solve this challenge by making its extensive library of enriched technical product content from over 100 brands available to its customers, which is uniquely created by its team of professional engineers who have experience in the industries their customers serve. So please check out kiklo.com if you're looking for the best product data around. So thanks to Kiklo, thanks to NetSuite Oracle NetSuite. We really appreciate the support. And now I'd like to welcome in our guest. We're honored to have on the show Mr. Erik Gershwind, who is, let's see, there we go. Oops, my machine locked up. Sorry about that, Erik. Well, happy to welcome to the show the president and CEO of MSC Industrial Supply, Mr. Erik Gershwind. Erik, thank you for joining us on Wholesale Change.
Ian, Jonathan, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me today.
It's our honor. So, hey, so for those of you who are on the webcast, I brought up Erik's very brief synopsis of your long career and including your education and your time at MSC. And Erik, maybe you could just sort of walk us through your background with the company over the years.
Sure, Ian. So my background, actually, I'm 50 years old, and I mentioned that I just turned 50 because my background with MSC goes back 50 years. So officially.
So first words out of your mouth were market share. Is that what you're saying?
So have you thought about making MSC a career, Erik?
I think MSC came out of my mouth before mama or dada.
Okay.
That's how it was. I mean, in all seriousness, for those who don't know, so MSC is today a publicly traded company, and we have all of the governance that comes along with that. But it is a bit different from your typical public company because it still is very much a family business. It was started by my grandfather in 1941. One of that generation had so many great American success stories, and his was one of them. And the business grew. It's now 81, 82 years old. I'm only our fourth CEO.
Wow.
It was my grandfather, his son, Mitch, who is my uncle and is our non-executive chair. And on Mitch's watch, MSC went from family business to becoming a national platform on the national scale. We had one non-family member who was our CEO, David Sandler, who was my mentor, and then me. So it's a pretty unique company in that regard. So my history with the company does go all the way back. MSC was essentially like a sibling around the dinner table, and I spent most of my summers through college, law school. Peers were off doing internships or what have you. I was working at MSC, and it really, whether that was starting out painting the warehouse floor and sweeping floors, answering phones in our call center at the time, which was located on Long Island, learning the business from the ground up. And I have to say, you have the education credentials there. That was the best education I got. Was learning the business from a very young age and really learning all facets of it. And so I did join officially 25 years ago, and was very fortunate because of my connection, my family connection coming in. The ground rules were pretty clear that we run the business, and our family always has run the business as a professional company, and anything that I did would have to be earned. However, it did afford me the opportunity to move through different areas of the company and really get a 360-degree view, if you will, and see things from all sides, which has colored my thinking on talent development inside the company going forward.
Yeah, so go on about that. So those, and I'm going to stop sharing here, Erik. We might come back to a couple of points here, but you talk about how those experiences working in those different roles has affected how you think about talent development. In what ways?
Well, Ian, I think it's so important to be able to see all sides of an issue. And that's something law school did bring to me, that you realize how important perspective is in life. And, it's one of the things I'm sure many of your viewers and your regular attendees, maybe are smaller distributors. And there's something wonderful about that, because in a smaller business, you get to do everything. And as a result, you really do get to think like an owner, because an owner has to balance. I think back to the MSC mission statement, which has been around for 4 decades and has served us well, and it's kind of been our North Star. And that mission statement is reflective of the idea of thinking like an owner, because it says we aspire to be the best industrial distributor in the world as measured by our associates, customers, owners, and suppliers. And it recognizes that we're part of an ecosystem, and that decisions have to be run up against all stakeholders, not just one. And I think rotating through a business, Ian, I know you've spent time in larger distribution businesses. It's harder to get that feel of thinking like an owner when you have functions and an org chart. And so rounding people out to think like an owner and doing buying and then doing selling and being on opposite sides. I remember being in the field and thinking, what are those product managers doing on some of the product assortment choices or pricing choices? And then you actually sit on the other side. So I think what it helps us do inside of MSC is create people that can think like an owner. And that's how it influenced me.
Right. So you can't really understand another person's perspective until you've walked a mile in their loafers.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, I think, there's this classic battle often between the people who guard the inventory performance and the people who are responsible for selling, and they each have their own perspective. Can't sell out of an empty cart. Yeah, but this carrying cost of inventory, working capital is the lifeblood of a distributor. And I don't know that there's any other way to get them to fully appreciate both perspectives without some of them at least spending time in their respective roles.
That's a great example of the kind of thinking like an owner mentality, Ian. And it did color my thinking the way I grew up, and I was afforded the opportunity to spend time in so many different areas.
Yeah. I've never worked at MSC, but I had 2 insights. I worked with a guy who worked at MSC, and he talked about how during the financial crisis of about around the year 2000, that, as the whole market was coming apart, Mitch was walking around reassuring everybody that things were going to be okay. And he was, lifting the spirits. And then I sort of unusually, I had dinner. I mentioned this to you. I had dinner with Mitch one time. And he was right across the table from me, and a waiter spilled a huge the regular glass of red wine all over him. And it's really in those seconds that you see people's values, right? Because you can't control that initial reaction. He could not have been more gracious. He was only worried about how the waiter felt so bad. It was reassuring him. And he went and, he said, that's why I wear these old clothes. Even I don't think they were really old clothes. But it gave me an insight into not only Mitch, but what I think are probably the values of the company, which is that you treat people with respect, regardless of the position that they're in. So that's been my sort of, two anecdote insight, I suppose, into the company's values. Is that how you see it? Is that what you practice?
Yeah, Ian, I mean, you're hitting on probably that word. If there's one word to describe MSC, it would be values-based. And I think, Mitch is a great embodiment of that. And it even goes back further to my grandfather, to his dad, started the business. Really, it was three principles that I think underpinned MSC. One is values, two is growth, and then three is this idea of reinvention. With respect to values, you're absolutely right, Ian. I mean, my grandfather was one of those people who believed in integrity. I remember one of my first years in the company, I walked the floor of the ISA show, which is the big Industrial Supply Association show, and somebody grabs me, saw my name tag MSC, and I guess pulled me aside and said, I worked with your grandfather for a lot of years, and I trusted him. His word was as good as gold. I never inked a deal with him. It was all done on handshake because I trusted him that much. And that idea of integrity, of caring about people, and empathy, what you described with Mitch, really tracked back to my grandfather, and it is very much still alive in the company today. I think that's the first thing I'd say. The second one being growth. I mean, my grandfather really believed that growth is the lifeblood of a business, because growth is really like the fuel for the engine that allows for reinvestment to improve your value proposition and help the customer, bonuses, career pathing for associates, market share for suppliers, obviously for owners, it creates value. So that is the engine. And then the third one, which kind of fits into, I know that the big topic today of the recent transformation of MSC, but I mean, we called it reinvention, but my grandfather was around. He started the business before Wayne Gretzky, but that Wayne Gretzky quote of, good players skate to where the puck is, and great players skate to where the puck is going. And we have always aspired to be great and to try to get there. And so with that in mind, there's been this idea that you can never standing still is moving backwards in business. And he always believed that a company needs to, the values are anchored into the ground like the roots of an oak tree. But everything around the values, your value proposition, how you operate, things like that, need to get reinvented on a regular basis. So I think those were kind of the three anchors that my grandfather left this company.
Great. So we'd like to encourage people to ask questions. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen if you are with us live. And so you recently launched a program or a reinvention initiative, I suppose, called Mission Critical. Do you want to sort of walk us through what the thinking is behind that, and what the legacy of the company was, where you are now, and where you're going?
Yeah, sure, Ian. And it's probably been the biggest sort of defining thing in my tenure as CEO, anyway. And it actually, while it's sort of gotten public play, and we've come public with it in the last couple of years, the seeds for this actually go back to roughly 2015 or so. So this has been several years in the making. So I took over as CEO in 2013, and my predecessor who grew me, David Sandler, I would always kid around with him and say, David, I don't know if you knew this was coming, but my timing was impeccable, because I step into the job, and then within several months of assuming the role, Amazon declares its intent to get into B2B and into industrial supplies. And I said, David, did you know this was coming? But I think that began, I call that out because it began, at the time, our thinking was that, look, it would be a tough transition for Amazon, and it was a tough putt to move from B2C to B2B, and the company was well positioned and everything. But we did view it was sort of the first of a few catalysts that caused us to sort of take a hard look at the company's value proposition and say, it's time for the next chapter of the story here, the next reinvention, if you will. And the company's legacy, and for those who are listening who probably know us for a long time in the industry, we'd be referred to as a catalog house, or what would be a spot buy supplier. So MSC's value proposition was having a lot of a very broad and deep product assortment, having a great logistics system with next day delivery, really frictionless and seamless customer service experience, And that was the role we played in the world for our customers for really a couple of decades. And you had a few things happen that triggered the change. Certainly one was realizing that whether Amazon gets it right or not, new entrants will come in with some of those same capabilities that we enjoyed. Nothing lasts forever. And at the same time, we started to hear this drumbeat that began, really, the seeds were planted coming out of the financial crisis, where our customers, who were primarily manufacturers or North American heavy industry, the drumbeat was, we need help. We're facing our own margin pressures. We're facing our own competitive threats and disruption. We need help running our businesses better. We need help expanding margins or fighting the eroding margins. There was this sort of awakening to the idea that, we all learned in Economics 101, cash is king. So the idea of freeing up inventory, of speeding up lead times and getting products into their customers' hands faster, all of this was sort of building. So we took a look inside and took stock of what we had and said, we think we can actually help our customers in a bigger way than just, Ian, as you were describing before we got on this call, our role kind of stopped when we delivered the product. And we said, we can play a bigger role, and we think we can actually help our customers overcome some of these challenges. And one of the reasons we thought that was our value proposition. In addition to being a spot buy supplier, going all the way back to my grandfather, the roots of the business were in metalworking supplies and cutting tools in particular. We had built up a lot of expertise on the buy side. We had also, through a combination of hiring, internal development, and acquisition, built a strong technical sales force. So a lot of people who were former machinists or engineers. And the reason we thought that was relevant is if you're a manufacturer, things like cutting tools, abrasives, and metalworking supplies can actually influence the final output and the product and the production process. We felt like we could really move the needle for our customers who were starving for help. And that was the catalyst, Ian, for the change. We sort of captured this in a brand promise that we called Built to Make You Better. And the idea was, we were going to do more than just ship product. We actually wanted to help make our customers, our suppliers, and our partners better. So that was really the catalyst. And then what that led to over a number of years was widespread changes to reposition MSC. So the value proposition, as I just described, our sales model. So selling a spot buy value proposition was relatively straightforward. Selling a more integrated, technical, high-touch value proposition, very different. So widespread changes there. Changes on supply chain. If you went back 10 years ago and asked me, what does supply chain mean? I would have talked to you about our 5 large customer fulfillment centers and some of our distribution network. And today, supply chain means much more at MSC, and I think everywhere, but it really starts when our suppliers' products get produced and now extend into the customer's operations through things like vending and VMI and our in-plant program. It's much broader. Technology changes, culture changes, moving from more of a catalog model where decision-making could be centralized to a decentralized field sales model. So all of these bodies of work went on, Ian, over the last several years. I would say that, going through a transformation, particularly as a public company, not for the faint of heart. It was a lot of work, but we've really, come out the other side. Mission critical was kind of our, in the last couple of years, are a bit of a play on words, because the idea was really about becoming mission critical and helping our customers tackle mission critical challenges on the plant floor. But it's become our mantra around bringing this to life and accelerating performance in the business, which is really starting to pick up steam now.
So Erik, this is terrific. So when we were talking before the show, we referenced that the Porter model is of the inbound logistics. That's where most MRO distributors are having their impact, right? And so part of the shift in your value proposition was getting onto the core operations, the plant floor. And when I was looking at the value-added services you had, and the case studies are very well done, by the way, the theme that came through again and again, almost exact words, are save time, reduce cost, and improve productivity. That last piece, is that happening in the core operation? Are you helping your customers improve productivity in the core operation? And if so, how?
Yeah, Jonathan, the answer is we are. And I actually think of the three things you mentioned, productivity, it's the biggest lever. Certainly our customers love it when we can save them money.
Mhm.
But, unlocking growth for our customers is an even bigger opportunity and lever for their value creation. We are, one of the ways I mentioned our metalworking expertise. I mean, I remember actually being part of one evaluation with a prospective customer who's now a very loyal customer. This is going back a couple of years. And this was an aerospace business, a subcontractor to aerospace. They were booming, pre-COVID when aerospace was booming. But their challenge was they were facing a tremendous drain on working capital because they didn't have enough capacity. Most of our customers are facing a combination of a skills gap, a manufacturing skills gap that existed pre-pandemic has only accelerated. And so they were running out of people and they were running out of space to support the work. And so they were staring a big check in the face. They were going to have to add another another line onto their capacity, expand their building, buy machines. And they did. So they were afraid to spend the money, and then they didn't know how they're going to staff the machines. So we brought in, what we do is we do what's called the business needs analysis, where we'll bring in some of our technical experts before we put a pitch together for a customer and do an evaluation of their operations. So long story short, I'm listening to this, and our metalworking expert who was at the meeting said, look, I did a site audit. And one of the things I found was that there were instances, there were applications where you're running your machines way too slow. You're not pushing the tooling at the appropriate RPMs. And the reason you're not, which is very typical, is because you couldn't hire people. You were bringing in temps who were risk averse because they weren't as experienced. No one wants to push the envelope. The worst thing you could do is break a tool and shut down the production line. And so they're running these machines well below capacity. And so he points out, he then goes in and he had testing examples where he said, look, we're going to need to change out some tooling to make sure you have the right tooling, but we think we can double the rate, the speed at which these machines are running. He proves it out, testing the performance with some new tooling. Long story short, we were able to essentially double the capacity of the current machines. Wow. So this customer didn't have to hire, and we helped them save having to add machines. So, and they were able to take on more work without adding capacity. So that sort of thing is where we thrive, Jonathan. Probably even more so than just a straight cost takeout.
Incredible.
So one of our hypotheses around sales reps, whatever you want to call them, account managers, technical reps, is that the bar, they're not going away, at least not in a lot of industries, but the height of the bar for what they have to know and be able to understand about customers is increasing, getting higher, right? So you talked about business needs analysis and a site audit. Now you can't do that if you don't have significant expertise, technical expertise that you can then use to turn into recommendations for solutions the distributor can provide, right? So it sounds like maybe your account managers were always trained on in those areas, but I can tell you most account managers are not in other distributors. So how do you figure out where the bar needs to be set for your outside sales reps and whatever your customer facing personnel are, and how do you get them over that bar?
Or is it a separate team that does this audit?
These are great questions, both of you are asking, and it does hone in on. So when I mentioned earlier on that to transition from a spot buy model to this, to this new value proposition required a change in our sales force, which highly disruptive because we kind of had a one size fits all sales model in that the bar in your analogy, the bar for selling a spot buy value proposition is not that high.
Right.
So having grown up in distribution, I knew it was not going to be an easy lift. I mean, when you start tinkering with the sales force in a distribution business, it is the equivalent of brain surgery on the body. It's complicated because you're severing, you're changing customer relationships. But we thought we had to do it to get to the other side. The way we did it was a combination of both of those things. So number one is we did segment the sales force. We felt that there were certain competencies, so that there was a base proficiency that we feel that any account manager has to have a working knowledge of some of the key pieces to the puzzle, but they're unlikely to have the kind of proficiency that takes decades and decades. That just doesn't come by going on online training and learning it. It comes with a lot of experience. So what we did is we did segment the sales force. So the typical account manager, first of all, depending upon the size of the account, the complexity of the account, we have a different type of rep. So somebody who's more seasoned, who has a machinist or engineering background, is more likely to be assigned to a highly complex metalworking environment, as opposed to, and that's for the base rep. On top of that, there are specialist groups that will come in and support the account manager. What I will say though is, and I think COVID really accelerated this, the bar has gone up for any salesperson that, boy, if the days of thinking you can just come in and say, what's doing and doing a regular check-in, there's no need for that. There was no need for it to begin with. And certainly if there is, it could be done through Zoom. That the bar, if you're going to show up and the customer is going to invest time with you, you have to bring some sort of value. And so we both raised the bar on our expectations for our general account management group, and then supplemented with expertise.
And is that, go ahead, Jonathan.
Please go ahead, Ian.
So does that involve, I'm assuming that's a combination of recruiting, right? So you want people with certain backgrounds, but no matter what background they have, I mean, if they're highly technical, they need to learn sort of the customer relationship management side. And if they're not, then if they come from a sales background, they need to learn new things technically. Do you have like formal training programs to try to get people over that bar?
We do. We've actually built something called MSC University. That's a full curriculum, both for sellers and actually for our support functions, what you refer to as headquarter functions around leadership and communication and managing people. But for our sellers, there's a robust training program. So it's a combination of we're recruiting people who come with deep expertise. And one of the nice things there is it becomes a bit of a snowball effect, a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we have so many people who understand metalworking and technical product lines. Others want to join because they're around people like them. We have an innovation center. We have partnerships with some metalworking experts. So they're getting a lot of tools. They're getting other people who understand the business. And then we do invest heavily in training. In fact, last week I was down, I'm coming to you now from Long Island, our hybrid office, which certainly we could talk at some point about our approach to hybrid, but our office here on Long Island, we're co-headquartered with a hybrid location in Davidson, North Carolina, which is outside of Charlotte, where Davidson College is. I was there last week with our senior team, and there happened to be roughly 70 or so new hires who were going through modules of our training curriculum. So yeah, we do invest heavily in training.
In this shift from just logistics to logistics and touching the shop floor, I presume that value-added services have been a big part of that, and this audit that you just described. I'm curious, how do you think about your value-added services? Do you have somebody who is assigned to manage the value-added services, to innovate, to create new value-added services? How does all that play into what you're doing now on the shop floor?
We do, Jonathan. So what I would say is it's anchored in anything aimed around improving customer output and productivity. So that's where it starts. It's got to benefit the customer. We then from there, I mean, in terms of if you back into internally, how do we organize? We have people who are fully responsible, who are living and breathing, whether it's inventory management, more recently an in-plant program, which is where we actually put our people. It's sort of like a hybrid between, it's the intersection between value-added service and supply chain, because we actually have our people help full-time managing customers' operations, procurement operations. So there are full-time dedicated people inside the company. On top of that, we've actually built an innovation group. It's pretty exciting. So one of the gentlemen who comes out of has a deep metalworking background, also happens to be really creative. And so we actually pulled him out of the line responsibility, and he's built a small group around metalworking innovation. And so we recently launched something called MSC MillMax, which came out of that group. But that group works closely with our technology folks. and kind of has a pipeline of innovations that get brought to market. And once they get brought to market, then they get, commercialized and they've got full-time ownership. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, but it sounds like the key thing like that you said, you start with value, right? You start with value that it can be measurable in some way in terms of improved productivity or throughput or something on the shop floor, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So one of the things that I'm curious about, Erik, and this gets back to another of our themes that we teach in our business, which is that no matter how well you measure the benefits of your digital initiatives, you're probably not attributing everything to them that they're really generating, because sometimes people will spend a long time putting a bill of materials together on your website, but then they're going to email it in or they're going to call somebody. So as the leader of the business, I mean, digital is very, very important to companies like MSC, I know, but how do you think about do you try to capture that stuff that's harder to attribute, or do you have enough that you can measure to make the investments worthwhile as it is?
So another good question. The first thing I'd say, and there's always like these camps, particularly since COVID, is the answer digital or is the answer people?
Right.
And we firm believers that it's both and not either or. Both are critical. Because of that, we are very much, the buzzword is omnichannel, but basically what that means is you're exactly right. The way customers use us, it's not an either or. Most of our customers, they may order online and shop offline, vice versa. They may shop online, but they need technical help and they'll pick up the phone. We want it to feel integrated. By its very nature, for that reason, it becomes a little trickier in terms of measuring. And some of what we're investing in is just table stakes. That said, certainly we do have ways, and I think more and more, there's enough now analytics and data to measure performance. One of the things I probably call out, we made a recent, we think digital is important enough and it's accelerated coming out of COVID that we actually made an organizational change. We just hired a fellow, John Hill, who joined us as Senior Vice President, Chief Digital and Information Officer. And so the change was, I think historically MSC, probably like most distributors, thought of technology as a support function. And we have a great IT organization, but our IT organization, the mindset has been it's there as a service and a support function. And most of the measures around IT were service and support. And I think what we've realized is that wrong paradigm, not the wrong, needs to be a support function, but it's not enough. That technology actually needs to have a seat around the table as leading, not following, but leading the business and telling it where to go. And so what we did is we created a new function that brought the technology, traditional technology, IT, coupled with the front end portions of the business that would be thought of as more digital. So whether that's e-commerce, inventory management. So it's actually a true business function with a P&L mindset and a strategy mindset to help lead us. So that's been it's early, but a exciting change.
So I can imagine, as you know, Erik, I've got an IT and tech background. I can imagine a lot of ways that things might go with technology leading. What you described as inventory and support. Do you see in the future where your website, instead of describing your value, becomes a mechanism for conveying or delivering your value as part of this initiative? Did that question make sense?
I think so. Look, I think the answer is yes. I think Jonathan, I'll give you an example. It may not be directly on the website, but all of us as distributors, and the difference between supporting and leading, all of us as distributors are sitting on a pile of information. I mean, this is sort of right up your alley. We're sitting on a lot of data. Mm-hmm. And at MSC, we've got 2 million SKUs. We've got hundreds of thousands of customers. So you think about all the permutations of all these little breadcrumbs that are telling us stuff about our customers, their buying behaviors, what's happening in their operations. And to date, we're kind of like, we're keeping up with it. But what we're doing in very isolated pockets that will become more widespread is mining that and turning it into analysis, to analytics that can actually lead us and say, hey, look over here, whether that's customers purchasing behavior, whether that's our own inventory, patterns and identifying products that should be added that aren't. I mean, there's a whole host that is waiting to be mined, and that's a big part of John's charter.
So a lot of it's delivering value-added analytics then.
Yep.
So Erik, there's sort of a paradigm that younger people in the workforce on the customer side means that sales reps are less important because people like that don't want to meet with outside sales reps. They look up information on their own and they don't need to go to lunch and play golf to do their jobs. But some people say, and this is frankly more my view, that a lot of times those younger people don't have the experience that the people who they're replacing had. And so if you have knowledgeable customer facing personnel, you actually have more of an opportunity to add value than ever, because you're now dealing with a customer who doesn't have the experience that the person that he or she replaced did. And so they need you more because they don't have that expertise and they're relying on the distributor to do it. And I'm sure it's a bell curve, but how do you think about that when you look at your customer base?
I think a lot of it goes back to your point earlier, Ian, that I don't think it's one or the other. I think the bar has gone up for what the role of the salesperson is and what this role of salesperson needs to be, which is to say that if the salesperson is going to come in and do what a millennial could do on their own, which is just, demonstrate products. I mean, all of that can be done in the finding, the research, that can all be done online. You don't need a salesperson for that. But even millennials, when they enter the workforce and they're part of a company, they have a job to do. And in all likelihood, that's job's going to be, how do I improve the performance of my company one way or another? And that could be on operations and sales and marketing. And so if the salesperson is coming in with insights that can help improve business performance, that's a very, very different paradigm than someone who's coming in to show product. So I would tend to agree with you. If the salesperson's coming in and can bring insights that improve operating performance for the customer, that never goes out of style.
Right. Well, when your branding, was it a tagline, built to make you better? Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So my experience with effective branding is it is not just intended to change the thinking of customers. It's intended to rally the employees around a mission. And built to make you better sounds like not only a claim of how you add value to customers, but also a challenge for employees that, hey, we've got to be able to make people better. So do you have an internal form of that, or does that resonate internally? And is that a call to action for employees to learn how to make customers be better?
Yes. Big believers that a brand needs to transcend any one stakeholder. Obviously the clearest stakeholder that we're catering to is the customer, but the brand is who you are, what you stand for, what you believe in, what your purpose in the world is. And that should transcend customers and apply to suppliers and apply to our own people. We spend a lot of time, we're very intentional about communicating our purpose and connecting people to why, not just what we do, but why we do it. And Built to Make You Better was supposed to capture that. And so we communicate that aggressively, which is that we exist. It goes back to my grandfather's, the values, the idea of, he was one of those, before servant leadership became a buzzword, that was what my grandfather was. He
Right.
believed that companies had a responsibility to serve communities, to serve others. And that's at the heart of what we're about. I think, the other part of the purpose is that we play a role that's much bigger than just, Jonathan mentioned most distributors, the role kind of stops when the product gets shipped in the door. We're playing a much bigger role, which is actually to help U.S. manufacturing, U.S. industry thrive by helping them improve performance. It resonates with people. So we spend a lot of time communicating purpose. And then we also spend a lot of time within every function saying, how do you connect? How do you connect into that purpose? What are you doing that actually helps the company achieve this ideal? So we do, and it does seem to resonate.
Great. So go ahead, John.
We have a question from a customer perspective. Erik, do you see the retirements, resignations, or those on the concrete side of the facilities operations being replaced by new technologies to know when an item, for example, needs to be repaired, replaced? Are they replacing people with technology on the maintenance of equipment? What's the role of people in technology in the future, I think, is really where this is going.
I'll tell you right now, Jonathan, if anything, what we see from our manufacturer, you would think that, to obviously look, most companies right now are heavily focused on automation, on analytics and robotics. That said, right now, we're not seeing those replace people. If anything, there's such a lack of supply of qualified manufacturing talent that it's actually the opposite. Our bigger issue with 90% of the customers we deal with is they're facing a skills gap, and they wish they could hire more than they could.
So one of the things we've spoken about significantly on our show is this idea of the complexity of the transaction. So if you can think about the simplest transactions from a logistics standpoint, from a product information, product value add standpoint, those are things that are going to ship by common carrier, small packages, don't require any value add. And then the other end of the spectrum, you've got perhaps significant logistic requirements and or significant value add requirements. When we started out this conversation, you talked about you came into this position as Amazon was entering the market. Our assumption is that Amazon is in competition with you for the simple transactions. And I'm curious, is it playing out that because you can do the complex transactions that you also get the simple transactions? How does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We if we look at kind of the moat that we've built for MSC, if it's purely if it's a customer who's looking to shop as a consumer, and the game is strictly about product availability, price, delivery, that is the least protected part of the business. Interestingly, what we find though, yes, when we deliver what it is that we do best, which is what we talked about with Built to Make You Better and helping our customers, yes, we find that the rate of stickiness, if you will, of a lot of the other sort of add-on sales come with it because it's convenient to do so. So yes.
Yeah, and as one example, if there's nothing that's sold in an industrial vending machine that is a complex product, but by virtue of the fact that it's in an industrial vending machine, it kind of protects it from other channels because someone has to go replenish the machine and has to have their IT system hook up to it, et cetera, right?
That's right. We just as a point of reference for MSC, well under 10% of our business has no value add wrapped around it, meaning a salesperson, an inventory management system, at least one or more of those mechanisms are over 90% of the business. That's
a great moat.
It's a huge moat.
Yeah.
With dragons and crocodiles and all kinds of stuff in there. I like it.
Hey, as we start to head towards wrapping this up, Erik, maybe can you tell us where you're going next? I mean, without revealing any competitive secrets, what have you publicly communicated or are willing to share about where you go from here?
Ian, we've been through so much in the way of transforming into who we've now become that it's a really exciting time at the company because we feel like we're just hitting our stride. And we're on the one hand, I would say we're really in execution mode of just delivering what we do now for customers over and over again. I think if anything, the pandemic, the transformation predated the pandemic, but was ongoing when COVID hit. And I think if anything, it sped up it accelerated progress. I think the things I'd probably call out would be heavy focus now on digital. And not digital at the expense of people, digital in support of people and knowledge. So that would be one that's going to accelerate. Two, a heavy focus on people, on talent development. We've all seen what's going on with the Great Resignation and the war on talent, a heavy focus on how we develop and retain our people. And then the third one that is also, I think, an outgrowth of COVID is how we speed up our decision-making. The world is moving faster. Decisions need to have, was one of my early learnings with the company from my first days and my summer jobs, was that the battle is not won in a corporate office, and that's not where the action happens. It happens in front of the customer on the front lines. And so we're really focused on speeding up our pace of play and how decision-making happens where the knowledge sits, which is the front lines. So those are the areas that will accelerate.
Yeah, good. Thank you. By the way, I've often said the same thing about great ideas. They don't normally come out of a corporate meeting room. They normally come from time in front of the customer. So, and then you mentioned earlier, you volunteered, I think, to talk about what your hybrid working approach or policy is going to be going forward. Are you willing to talk about, how you're going to handle remote work and virtual work?
Yeah, we kind of leaned into the hybrid. My premise is that we're all living through this giant science experiment coming out of a 1 to 2 year hiatus from the world. And, our feeling is all of us are going to learn as we go. We decided to lean in and say that certainly it was not sustainable to work from home forever, 5 days a week, and retain culture and allow people to innovate. But at the same time, we did feel like there's something to it that people enjoyed. And we heard this from our people, our engagement scores. We measure engagement regularly. They've never been higher. Wow. People enjoy the flexibility. They enjoy the ability to work from home when it makes sense to do so. And so we decided to lean in and say, so here on Long Island, we had a lot of space. We are in the process of selling our building. We have downsized and moved. The building I sit in now can house between 35 and 45% of our Long Island-based population on any one day. It's a hoteling model. We have an app like an open table-like app where people can reserve space. And really, it seems to be its early days, but bringing the best of both worlds, where when teams want to meet, when they want to collaborate, when they want to press the flesh with a supplier, a customer, the space is here. And then if they need the flexibility to work from home or desire it, they can do so. And, so far, so good. And I think we're going to be very conscious about retaining culture as we do it.
Fantastic. Well, Erik, this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you for being so open and sharing so much with our audience. We really appreciate you making time to join us here on the Wholesale Change Show. Just for our audience, we do have a couple of events coming up you might be interested in. June 1st, we've got State of Distributor Sales. We've just completed a survey of a bunch of decision makers who manage sales forces for distributors. And we have Frank Hurt, who is a leading thinker on Salesforce transformation, who has putting that program together, and I'll be doing the color commentary. And then the next episode of Wholesale Change, we have someone who used to be on your board and was for a long time, Erik, Jonathan Burns, who's a senior lecturer at MIT, and he'll be talking about taking back control of your profitability. That episode of Wholesale Change is being brought to you by Epicor. State of Distributor Sales is being brought to you by Epicor and Proton.ai, a company I know both of you know very well. But today we want to thank NetSuite and we want to thank Kiklo for sponsoring this episode so that we could have this great discussion with Erik Gershwind. Erik, thanks again, my friend. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Ian, my pleasure. And if I could give a quick plug for Jonathan, because he's a dear friend of the company's, your viewers are in for a treat when he speaks on June 8th.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Those guys with initials JB, what can I say?
Yeah. Okay, great. So speaking of JB, his contact information is on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Mine is on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. You can go to our website, distributionstrategy.com, to see all of our events or get a hold of us there as well. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Erik, thanks again. Jonathan, great to work with you. We'll see you next time on the Wholesale Change Show. Bye now.
Thank you both.